Well, today we're going to talk about the encampment around the tabernacle. This will be the first part of a sort of encampment series that I wanted to do. My apologies. I wanted to put this in a PowerPoint presentation, I guess, to really torture people with, but it's rather than go through all the trouble of putting all of that in that format and to avoid some sort of operational creep, I just want to get this out and put it on the air and let people see it this way. I'll try this format of just sharing my screen and explaining, taking everybody sort of through this of how I see it. So yeah, we'll just get started here. Preface to this, it's not intended to steal away any thunder that anybody kind of already has, any comfort that people have set up in their belief systems and everything else. I'm just trying to get people to have an open mind to things and maybe rethink some of these images that you might have in your head that are kind of etched, right? They're kind of engraved. One of the things we're not supposed to do, we keep an open mind a little bit about some of these things. But one of these things is going to be the encampment. In the story, we're coming out of the book of Exodus. We have that book of Leviticus kind of thrown in there in between, but we're picking up in the story from Exodus, and this is from the book of Numbers. This is where I started studying, reading the Bible almost a year ago. The November 19th, 2024 is when I first picked up and started trying reading the Bible, and this is where I started, is in the book of Numbers, and it's it's pretty much as far as I've gotten because I've been so rooted into trying to understand some things about this. But I guess to start with, we need to understand that this is all central to this book of Numbers right here. Is we have we're basing this off the tabernacle, which we'll see that in just doing a Google search of encampment around the tabernacle, we'll see that it's dominated by this imagery of this sort of rectangular tabernacle here. And again, this is not to strike down kind of a lot of these efforts that people have put in to these works. I think there's some value to it, but I think you got to be careful to thinking that this is going to be the absolute truth or that you can't think of this maybe in another way. But so this is, you got to remember, precept upon precept. So if you have a rectangular tabernacle in the center here, you see how you're going to end up with this other imagery, right? Again, great. This is great. A great job of Balaam and Balaam up here looking down at the tribes down here, and it's a nice job, and people have a lot of comfort in this imagery, right? You're going to see the cross right here, like as you do in other ones, but this is going to give you a lot of comfort, whether even if you're this is Judaism. You have the covenant, the tav here, the cross, and then in Christianity, of course, is going to be you're popping champagne bottles and lighting up cigars like you just won the World Series here. So it's near and dear to people's hearts, and it's something that people don't like to tamper with. They don't want to break from this kind of thinking. I'll say that this image right here, not to strike down the work here, but you just got to be careful because obviously I saw this the first time and I'm like, that doesn't add up. Something's wrong here. Obviously, the 50 is missing from Issachar's number there, right? 54,400 is the number given, not 4,400. But yeah, and this is kind of what got me down the path of actually looking at and reading the Bible for myself, not taking other people's word for it. So, but it goes further than that. You really have to, beyond just looking at other people's interpretations. We got to go all the way back, I think, into looking at the scripture, the Hebrew scripture from the English translation. And this is again something that people don't want to break from. You think of all of the strife that humanity went through just to get the scriptures, these base scriptures, into English. With, there's a lot of pushback saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing that. And if you're really studying the base scripture, you can kind of understand why you don't want to do that, because Matthew 5:18, you're going to have Christ coming along telling you that don't change a jot or tittle in this, because there's details in this scripture that are going to get lost in your transliteration. But that's not to say that maybe that this isn't a good introduction. So this would be sort of your gateway into understanding the English translation and getting some value of the scripture through your English translation through the King James. But you still, I think, in my opinion, like, I don't know, I'm not fluent in Hebrew or anything like that, but it is, I think, you do have to get back and kind of investigate and look into some of these base scriptures, because there's a lot of imagery that's going to be projected on you from these transliterations. For instance, we're in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, and, this is our English translation. And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation on the first day, okay? But over here, the breakup of this would be more, and he is speaking Yahweh to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of appointment in 1 month, the second, okay? So that's all pretty, that correlates pretty well. Tent of appointment here, though, instead of the congregation. And then when we get down to, for instance, 3 right here, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel, thou and Aaron shall number them by their armies. Well, if we're coming over here to 1:3, from the son of 20 year and upward, every of one going forth host in Israel, you shall muster them to hosts of them, and you and Aaron, and with you they shall become man for the stock, man head to the house of the fathers of him, he. And these, okay, so where are you getting armies? Where are you getting war? This concept in here. I'm not saying that's not something that you should be doing, but you got to see that it's coming from this word right here of muster, because this muster, the use of this word is associated with military action, and we see that the word right here, our base word, is this. It's pakad is the middle term right here. It's a pei, kuf, dalet. So if we were to search this, if we're going to look this up, we're going to search this word, we'll see that this pakad, to visit, attend to, appoint, at all, avenge, bestow, appoint, to have, to give charge. Right, so this can be translated as muster, but it could also just mean just an appointed number. So you got to think that all of this idea of going to war and fighting, not saying it's not right, but at the same time, this is a tent of appointment. We could just be talking about an appointed number, and this is where you're going to get in if you're going to look at the actual commentary of this. This is the Abington Bible Commentary. The one I got from my local bookstore, used bookstore, was from 1929. So it's the cumulative knowledge on this up to that point, before the advent of television in everybody's household, right? Pre-World War II type thinking, but yeah, right here it's telling you that there's things about this book that are just are kind of left. It's not really understood, right? To be properly appreciated, this book must be read as it is for what it is, namely a miscellaneous collection of lists, laws, itineraries and traditions which later Israel had gathered up and preserved as part of its heritage, a past too distant to be distinct but too vital to be forgotten. So, I mean, it's people aren't fully understanding, I think, or seeing what's happening in this book, or they don't know how to take it. When you're looking at just the numbers right here, modern vital statistics show how 600,000 men 20 years and old apply to a population of more than 2 million, whereas in the days of the monarchy, the maximum population of the northern and southern kingdoms did not exceed 1 million. So they're challenging in this account here of the reading of this book that, hey, we don't know that it's possible, or that there would have been 2 million people, or where is the evidence of the people? So you got to maybe be thinking that these scriptures are talking about something more abstract and less literal. And that's something that people don't like to break from, but you got to remember that this book of Numbers has in it a talking donkey. We have 250 people getting swallowed up by the earth and not dying. Okay, so we got to be thinking, I think, a little bit more abstract as to what's going on in the numbers. And we'll see, like, it talks about the repeated mechanical regularity of the totals that are given of these tribes. So we know that the numbers are correct. The numbers in the scriptures are right, and there's a meaning there, and we've got to draw that out. But again, this is all starting from this base, right? This base, what your understanding of is of the tabernacle, and that needs to come into question, just like Andrew Hoy's work at Project 314. So I would encourage everybody to go and check out what Andrew Hoy has done. He has this book, House of El Shaddai. He also has a book, Eat Like Jesus, which also is going to talk about some of this, challenging some of this common interpretation that we have of the Scripture, and not to be so rigid of your thinking or the image that you have that's being projected from the transliteration of these Scriptures. Okay, so I would encourage everybody, read this book, understand the superior, from an engineering standpoint, not even talking abstract yet, just talking engineer-wise. He's going to show you all the reasons why this doesn't make sense, and that everything that's given you in the instructions in the given Hebrew is going to be, this is right. So he's done all of this legwork of learning the Hebrew Scripture, and living in Israel, and all of these other things, to go and put a lot of investigation into this. And this is important. People are going to say, well, why is it important? Well, it's important because, like, you're going to get to another book, the book of Numbers, and talking about the encampment, and people are just kind of you're going to see the totals right here, and you just kind of leave it up to it, right? Or people take liberties with this, like when we talk about the layout of the camp. If this is circular, what does that do with our given numbers for the Levites in here? What does that do to, right, our defense posture? We're talking about this is a war defense posture, but this gives us a warm and fuzzy again. But I mean, are we leaving lines of, right, is this a good defense posture? Really? That doesn't really make sense. And then you're going to see how people have done, right? They're going to put, you'll see how Issachar might be on Judah's left and Zebulun to his right, to these different facing directions. It's just, there seems to be a lot of different interpretations, but a lot of it is based off of this rectangular shape here in the middle. So we want to break from that. We want to start thinking about this. What happens, okay, if we have a circular shape in the center for that circular tabernacle? And now we have these given numbers. Maybe it's not a total number of people. Maybe it's just a given number. So now what do these numbers mean? Right? Are we talking about men going to war, or what's happening here? So you got to remember Matthew 5:18. Christ is telling you, again, every jot and tittle. There's detail in here of this Scripture that matters, and you're going to find subtle differences in here. So this pakad, this muster word right here, you'll see there's differences being used in this from time to time. When we get through like the Numbers chapter 1, we're just going through and we're getting a different, it starts, you're going to get all the patriarchs in a given order, and it starts off being pretty close to the order in which they're born, kind of, I guess, by mothers, different mothers, right? Because Reuben, Simeon, Levi's left out, and then you have Judah. That would be of Leah, the first go of Jacob and Leah. And then you have, I guess you jump, well, you're staying with Leah, Issachar, and Zebulun, which would be the 9th and 10th children born to Jacob. And then you're jumping over here to Rachel. So Joseph, and then through Joseph, the adopted Ephraim, and then Manasseh would be the firstborn in that lineage, and Benjamin. So you have Rachel's children next, and then Dan, which would be the 5th, and Asher, the 6th sons of Jacob, through Bilhah is mentioned next, and then you have Gad. Well, actually, it should be Gad and Asher. So that's kind of all. That's strange. It should be Dan and Naphtali, I think, of Bilhah. And then Gad would be the 7th, Asher the 8th. So you'll see that there's no real rhyme or reason as far as the listing, I don't think, of these. But what you do see down here is this mustering word. Okay, when we look at this term for muster, we're going to find, where do we start? Numbering them. Males being mustered. So it's mentioned in, I think the mechanic of this is every odd number you're going to get this word muster. So it's this pakad, the yod hey mem, which would be a plural, right? So mustered of them, appointed of them, for 21. In 22 you're getting, this is a singular. So this is the only time it happens, and it's for Simeon, that this extra little piece is mentioned for Simeon. So it's a pakad diu, right? With a yod and a vav here, so singular. And then it's, from here on out, it's like 23, 25, you'll see every one of them is this pakad with this plural. So it's going to be appointed of them, of them, of them. So you'll see that happens in chapter 1. In chapter 2, it's a little bit different story. Numbers chapter 2. So yeah, we're going to be getting, you'll notice that this pakad, so we got the total. Let's get down to where we got the individual tribes. So we're starting with Judah. Again, that chapter 1, we're mentioning firstborn Reuben, and then Simeon. Levi is not mentioned until verse 47, I think, and then Judah. Here we're starting with Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. So this is going to be how they're marching out. And again, we'll look at the directions, because we're given eastward and sunriseward for Judah. So we're given 2 different directions. We'll look at this in a second here, but just staying with this pakad term, is we've got in Judah, again, we've got our mustering term, appointed term. We should change this to appointed again. It's going to be plural. And then it's every other one, I think. So we got singular for Issachar. We have singular for Zebulun right here. It's a pakad with the vav here. And then we're singular for Reuben. Okay, a pakad with a vav. And then we have a pakad with plural. So you'll find that all of the rest of them, every other one as you go down here, is going to be plural. And again, this is mechanical. So it's all the same. It's going to be the same words. It's just you're changing. You're going to be changing some different pieces to this as far as the given, the name and the given amounts, the number for all of the different tribes. So how do they march out? Well, we'll look at this. I'll just pull it up on a spreadsheet here. It'd be easier to kind of see, I think, this way. Because we're talking about We'll do this. We're talking about, again, we're not going from a rectangular tabernacle. We're going from a round tabernacle now. So now we've got to be thinking of all of these populations of these tribes right here, this appointed number for the tribes. It's all going to be making up a percentage, a portion of this circle. Okay, and we've got a given direction here, right? Our cardinal directions. And so if we plug this in over here, we know that Judah's number, right? Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, they're grouped as the lion. So we'll take all of these numbers in from what we're given in the scripture there. Reuben, Simeon, Gad is going to be grouped for the grouping of man. We'll get this from Ezekiel later on as far as the directions, because we're going to tie in these directions with the faces that you're given in Ezekiel's vision, and then we're going to tie that into this grouping these together for, Judah, the grouping here is associated with the lion, Reuben with the man, Ephraim with the ox, Dan with the eagle or the vulture, right? So we'll see that all of these numbers, they're going to total up 603,550. And now, so when we actually plug this in and figure out, what percentage of the circle each of these are, we'll just to find the degrees, we're just going to take the number here. We'll divide that by 603,550 and multiply by 360, because that's going to give us our percentage, and then transfer that into percentage of 360 degree circle. And so now this is going to be our degree representation. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. All right, so this is going to be our degree representation here for all of these tribes. And this is based off of this 603,550. And then we're going to do the same thing for our total group. Divide this by 603,550 and multiply by 360. This will be our degree representation for each of these. So now we have our circle and our degrees represented here. We'll see that the grouping of man is very close to 90 degrees. It's off by 1/3 of a degree. And so when I first looked at this, what I did was I just said, okay, well, what happens if you just set this grouping of man to an even 90 degrees? So when you do that, obviously, but that would mean that this figure here times 4 would give you your total, and then the difference would be 2250. Now you got to remember that in the scripture here, you got to remember that in chapter 2 verse 33 is where we're going to start talking about the Levites. So right after Reuben's group marches out, here earlier on in the chapter, so it's after Gad. So after Gad, you're going to get the total for Reuben, which is Reuben's grouping, which is 151,450. And then you're told that right here in 217 that there's some portion of Levites march out in the midst of the camp. You're not told where they march out in the midst of this camp. So it's sort of like a puzzle, right? There's this little piece of information that you're told that something happened here, but it's intentionally left out. It's intentionally hidden from us, so that we really got to wrestle with this to understand and know what the heck's going on. Because then you're going to go straight into what's going on with Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, the grouping of ox. And then all the way after you get your total mentioned here of 603,550, you're told that the Levites weren't numbered. So there's no appointed number for the Levites directly. But you're told that some element of them did march out with this group. But Moses is instructed not to put that in there. So what does this mean? What are we supposed to take of that information? Well, my thinking was, as I'm reading this, I just plugged it in and said, okay, well, we're going to find a quarter of the circle, and if we just set this to 90 degrees, sort of what happens. And is that justified to do? Well, we'll see that later on. I meant to show you this too here. If we go to Numbers chapter 23, when Balaam's up there, Balaam and Balak are up here, looking at, they're up on that mountaintop looking down at Israel, right? So he's saying, who can count the dust of Jacob and the number of the fourth part of Israel? So it's sort of, to me, it was kind of nudging you down this idea of, hey, there's a 1/4 part of Israel that you're supposed to be finding here. So in doing that, this is kind of what got me down the path of just setting this to 90 degrees. So if you set this to 90 degrees, 1/4 part of 603,550 is an odd number right here. It's not an even number. So 1/4 of this, obviously, we know is 151,450. So that means that you have a difference here. The difference between these two terms is going to be 2250, right? And we can, I figure we can associate this. Perhaps this is that missing number for Levi in the censuses. Okay, so 2250. Well, let's just see what it does first to our percentage here, because once you get the percentages, you kind of want to try and figure out where, like in what direction, because you only get so far in the range of Judah, and then pretty soon you're going to be, you're already outside of Dan right here, right? So Dan, you're not going to be true north to Dan. If you get outside of Judah's range here, or to his limit, or if you're to the other limit of Judah, you're way outside of Reuben and Ephraim, right? So these, you start looking at how you're supposed to align this, so that really it's between Dan and Reuben, and we know Dan is sort of the balance, the scales, right? So really what I ended up doing, since Reuben, you'll find in the again in your Genesis, is it 49, right? So Genesis 49 is where you're going to get the blessings for everyone. So when you start looking at, Judah is to be praised above his brothers. That's why I kind of associate eastward, upward. Also, eastward is, associated with the sunrise word, and then we'll see that westward is actually seaward. It's not actually a given cardinal direction. It's westward instead of eastward, or it's seaward instead of westward, right? But Reuben, you're my firstborn, beginning of my strength, and excellency of dignity, and excellency of power. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel. But thou wentest up to thy father's bed, and defilest thou, he went up to my couch, right? And then later on, when we look at Levi, we'll think about, when we get to the second census, Levi and our brethren, and they dig down a wall, and it talks about all this. They slew a man, and so will they dig down a wall, and we'll look at that later on. But for right now, we're trying to figure out, this circle, right? And trying to figure out and make sense of these numbers. Like, how do these numbers make sense? So one of the things is, like, we're going to be looking at the blessings and aligning all of this. We're challenged to find the 1/4 part of Israel. And then another thing that we're going to see in these numbers, these given numbers, the one that stands out is going to be Gad's number. Gad's number is the only one that's divisible by 50. So if we were to take all these numbers here, and we'll copy these down, and then we're going to divide all of these numbers by 50. You'll see that, because we can't divide them by 100, so the 50 is our least common multiple. So after this, all of them are divisible by 2 now, except for Gad's number. So the two factors here are going to be 80, what is it? Yeah, 13 and 81, right? Or 83 and 11? 83 and 11 is what it is. And I think I've got a breakdown right here of all the different factors of these numbers once you find these. But and you can look at all that stuff there. But I'm trying to keep this so that we're not jumping ahead here. So we found the quarter of the circle. We looked at some of these degrees. So okay, now Levi, if we're 2250, what we can do now is we can maybe just kind of see. I forgot where I was going. Gad 913, that's Bereshit in the beginning. So that's kind of telling us that we should start with Gad, right? So it seems like confirmation that we're to start with Gad. We're trying to confirm 2250 for Levi if this is a legitimate number. We're trying to find like where are we supposed to align, our true east in Judah, our true south in Reuben, our true west in Ephraim, and north in Dan. Like, how do we align this once we break up the circumference of our circle into these different portions, these different degree representations of all the tribes in the circle, once we base this off the tabernacle being round. So what we see here is that Reuben, the beginning of strength and dignity and excellence, right? And then we see that this grouping of man, Reuben, Simeon, and Gad together being 90 degrees. Well, what you end up doing is you assign this to this 90 degree piece, right? This right here is going to be based off of a 603,550, but this is the first version, and we're going to take this out, and now we found that maybe Levi, the 2250 of Levi, is making up that 60550 difference. So we'll bring this one in here. We'll align this to center. And now we have Reuben, Simeon, Gad at even 90 degrees. So Reuben is going to be right on 90 degrees, and then Gad is this Ephraim right here. We've got Levi. I put Levi in right here the first time because he's mentioned right after Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. And then Ephraim isn't exactly mentioned westward, he's seaward. So maybe it's okay for him not to be right on this cardinal direction. And then Dan is left in the balance, Judah's left in the balance right here. So what do we have for our degree representation now that we've got this sort of a line? So I put Reuben, again, right on the south line, Gad right on the west, and even 90 degrees. I plug Levi in here for right now, and then we've got everybody else laid out in the circle all the way around. And so let's see what our degree representation is now. So instead of dividing by 603,550, we've got an adjusted total now for the total Levites with Levi included of 605,800. So we're going to take and we're going to look at all of these numbers, divide them by 605,800 now, and multiply by 360 to get our degree representation. And it's not off by much. It's pretty close to the same. And that's because Levi's representation right here is going to be 1 1/3 degrees. So now we can look at our groupings right here and look at the difference here. Divide this by 605,800 and multiply by 360. And we're going to get slight variations here. Obviously, we're back to 90 degrees even for this grouping. Right? And we're to 93.65 degrees for this grouping of eagles. So this is what drew my attention after doing this, because right away I'm seeing the difference now between the grouping of man and the grouping of eagle is 3.65 degrees. So I see this as a pattern of numbers that I'm recognizing for the solar year. So then I'm thinking, okay, so eagle minus man is evidently it's pretty easy to see this, that 93 point this minus 90 is going to be the remainder, 3.65. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So then the next, I thought, well, I'll find the difference between the other two. So I'm looking at the difference between the eagle over here, Dan Asher, Naphtali, and Reuben, Simeon, Gad. So we'll find the difference of the other opposing groupings. And so the lion minus the ox, we're going to take this number and we're going to subtract this number. And we're going to get 46.5 degrees. So this I'm seeing is, that's pretty close to your range, right, of your solar range over the course of the year off of the equator both ways, because it's about 47 degrees inclination off of your equator, and then the 365 is going to be the number of days in your solar year. So I see that both of these terms are relative to sun, right? Measurements of the sun in one way or the other, whether you're measuring the inclination off the sort of the equator, the ecliptic ranges, and the number of days. So then I was like, well, we've got this number for Levi. How does this factor in? Well, I noted that, I'm playing around with these numbers. I'm trying all different combinations. And one number that popped out to me was if I took this difference between the eagle and man, I divided it by Levi right here. And when we do this, we're going to find that this number divided by Levi's number right here, and we get this 2.73 repeating number. So we know that 273 is not, this is a number that's going to show up for us in chapter 4 when we start talking about the Levites over 1 month old. When we start talking about the difference of firstborns and everything else, this is a number that pops up. So then I continued playing around, and what I did was I added together this difference. So I added this number with our number for Levi here, our degree representation. And so what you end up with is this number right here, this 2.733, is relative to the sidereal period for a month. Now, most people are going to think of the 29.5-day synodic period of the month, right? The point at which the moon is going from one phase, full moon, right, changing all of its phases back into a full moon. That's 29.5 days. But the period for the moon to be in one place amongst the background stars and then make its way all the way around and end up in that same spot, that's 27 1/3 days. So I'm seeing some of these things, right? So we already know 365 days, whether it's the tropical or sidereal year for the sun, we know that those are about the same. They're off by whatever, 20 minutes or something. 20 minutes difference. So, but it's 365 and change, and we got 27 1/3 days for the moon. So we've got the sidereals for the sun and the moon here. We've got the variance, right, for the sun over the course of a year off of the equator, right, both directions. And then this is off by 2 decimal places. This is off by 1 decimal place. And this 4.99, that's the degree. That's how far, in degrees off that the moon variance is, right, off of the equator. There's going to be 4.99 degrees. So, and that's the minimum, right? It can go up to whatever, 5.12 or something, but that's in line with the minimum. So when you do this, when you plug Levi in right here and you find this number and you adjust this total to 605,800, when you first look at these groups and you're looking at the degree representation here, you're getting numbers that are popping out that are relative to the sun and then the moon in their periods, their cyclic periods in relation to the stars, and then also off of your middle point, right, off of your equator. You're getting a number in degrees in inclination that's relative to that. So I figure, is this all coincidence? Could this be just happenstance? Well, 2250 we can see, is there any other way that this might might something that might pop out, right? That'll bring out to us that this is true. Well, Judah, we know when we're looking at you know that later on that Ephraim and Manasseh get adopted to get their double birthright for Joseph later on down the road, because you know you thought that he had died. So people like to say that Judah gets the birthright, right? Because Simeon and Levi, they surrender their birthright with the retribution for Dinah, and then people like to, okay, Reuben went up to his father's couch in the blessing and defiled it or something. So they have this action between Reuben and Bilhah as basically him surrendering or losing his birthright, so they give it to Judah. So if you were to double Judah's portion here, and we take Judah and we're going to double that. Now 149, 1492, Columbus. But how close is this going to be to any of our numbers? How close are we to, for instance, 1/4 of the circle? Well, if we were to look at this difference and subtract this from this, we're going to see that it comes out to 2250. So that's kind of interesting. And if we're going to look at, is 2250 relative to any of these numbers right here? So if we're going to look at any of these numbers, is 2250 relevant to any of these? So we're going to divide these numbers by 2250, and we're not getting anything there. Nothing real significant that stands out. So where it does pop is Ephraim. Ephraim's number of 40,500 is a multiple by 18 of this number we found that we're associating to Levi, of 2250. So I thought that was pretty interesting, because when we look at the second census, Gad's number is going to become 40,500, right? This is going to be Gad's number in the second census. It's going to shrink down to that number. And we'll talk about the second census in another video. But, so I thought that was interesting that shows up. Another thing that we can look at is going to be in the, a lot of people don't like to look at gematria. I did look at 913, we talked about, I mentioned it before, but Bereshit, that's in the beginning. And we can think that we should start with Gad right here, right? Gad is, remember, in the blessings is, when you look at the instance for these things, Gad is sort of how you understand the tense. So if we're going to look up the instance for the tribes right here, we're going to look at all these different things. What you normally see for Gad is a shape of a tent, right? And you'll find other things, like Reuben is usually the water, and then it's interesting that Issachar has this sort of eclipse pattern happening. So you have an eclipse and then you have a star popping up, and other people will have the donkey for Issachar, and you'll see later in the book of Numbers that we have a donkey clapping back at Balaam. And it's interesting that you do have a star that shows up in the T Corona Borealis, during eclipses and stuff. But at any rate, Zebulun, a haven for ships, and he's always right next to Reuben, who we kind of got at sea level, because we're looking at this up to down. But anyway, Gad is always these tents. He's the tent. Zebulun the ships. Reuben right here, right, unstable as water, sea level. Simeon's got a wall, and you got a warring happening. Levi's associated with, I think this is a Het. Is this a Het and a Yod? So that's 18. That's interesting. But he is associated with the law, or the breastplate, or all these different things. So Dan the scales. So it's interesting that you're seeing some of these things. Benjamin is, they've got as a wolf howling at the, you think of wolves howling at the moon, werewolves in the moon and whatnot, and you got kind of a moon shape in there going on. And we'll see significance of that with Benjamin later on. But these instances are just interesting with Gad. So when we're looking at Gad, sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. This is probably going to be hard to follow. I'm just kind of spilling out thoughts talking here. But anyway, I'm on the wrong thing. I'm sorry. We're back into numbers. So Gad, obviously, Gimel Dalet is how we're spelling his name. And of course, that's going to add up to 3 and 4, that's 7. Gad is the Gimel Dalet there. He's the 7th son. Son of Zilpah, right? Zion, 7. So all of that's, I find, pretty interesting. But we're looking at Gematria here. So again, we're in Numbers 2:14 with Gad. We're looking at Gad's number, and we see that in that passage when we're talking about Gad was Numbers 2:14, 1 through 8 is where we're going to be getting the number for Gad. And you'll see that the first 2 words in that passage, I'm all over the place. I think I'm wrong here. I got to look at this again. Right, so we're looking at 2:15. I was looking at the wrong verse, right? Because and a host of him and the ones being appointed of them, you have these 2 words, and then now you have the 5 and 40,000 and 650. So you got these other 6 words here that are going to give us the total 45,650, this number for Gad. So when we actually look at this passage, which is 2:15, 1 through 8, those first 2 words right here are going to be the and host of him, the numbered, right? The appointed number. And so that's adding up to 350 right there. So this total verse, if we looked at the whole verse, 1 through 8, Gematria would be 2600, standard Gematria, okay? So this is going to be, your Aleph through your Yod is 1 through 10, and then, starting with your Kaf is 20, right through your 20 to 100 up to, I can't think right now, to the Kuf. And then, Resh, Shin, Tav would be 200, 300, 400, right? So you're counting by tens. So anyway, standard Gematria, you can go look all that stuff up. But your total right here, 2,600. But if you're going to look at just the number itself, right? And that's going to be the 5 and 40,000, right? Those, that's going to total, where are we at? Counting on not too many. Yeah, so Chumesh, right? So 5 and 40,000 and 650 right here is going to be 2,250. That's the total right here of all of this. Totals up to 2,250. So that, I think, is pretty, to me, I thought was pretty interesting, pretty cool, pretty convincing. To again point you down the path of, hey, this is you're onto the right track, right? You're doing right here. So at any rate, this, I think I can probably wrap up as the first video. I know this went a little long, and then we'll get into kind of what you find after this. So just to recap, we're abandoning this the rectangular model, and we're trying to see how the encampment is going to fit if we're considering it round. So we're putting all of the tribes in a circular formation here, appointed numbers. We're not thinking so much in terms of military rank and file in these particular directions to give us a cross shape, where we've got a round circular tabernacle, we've got a circular encampment around it, and then now we're trying to look at the blessing, and we're trying to piece in and try to make sense of our march out here and what these pieces are representing. And we're looking and finding that in these groups, these faces, in accordance with Ezekiel's vision later on of this sort of moving, this chariot thing that's moving around and it's spinning and turning and all this stuff, we're seeing that there's relevance here to doing this when we find this little piece, Levi being this little piece, right? And Malachi is telling us that, hey, this is the thing that we need to be balancing out the sun and the moon with, right? Is going to be this. Now, Levi 2250, we're assigning that to Levi. We're finding that difference, the 1/4 part of Israel. We're seeing the degree representation when we do this starts to pan out with some pretty interesting numbers right here in relation to the sun and moon, gold and silver, right? We're seeing some confirmation maybe with 2250 relation to Ephraim, and Ephraim tied into Gad, and then Gad's number being the number 50, extra 50 that we're to understand the encampment from, right? It's sort of the good fortune. It's the thing that we're supposed to be kind of helping us out and getting us started, right? It's at the beginning, right? 913, Bereshit, in the beginning, right? For those that don't know, if we're going to look at this gematria again, we'll go back to, we'll go all the way back up here to Genesis 1, the whole start of this thing, in the beginning, 913, okay? Bereshit, 913. And I know that it's how you start the construction of the tabernacle is also 913 too. So I'll have to dig that up for another video here. But another thing, like if we wanted to confirm, is there any relationship between 2250 and Levi? Oops, take my caps locked off here. And Levi in the Bible. Is there any association here? Well, it's telling us connection between 2250 and Levi is found in the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, which describes the gates of a restored holy city. In the prophet Ezekiel's vision, the city has 4 walls, each measuring 2250 cubits. Each wall has 3 gates, each gate named for one of the tribes of Israel. So Reuben, Judah, Levi, these are kind of our pivotal players so far. The next video that I'll do up here is going to be, we're going to expand on what we're finding so far with this 2250 and Levi and our encampment. So we're going to go through some adjustments to kind of how we're divvying up our circle here. But you'll see that there is some association here to 2250 in the gates, right? It's not symbolic, but in the precise measurement detailing the dimensions of the future holy city, which represents the perfection of God's restoration. So, yeah, hopefully this is in line with some of this stuff. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Be looking for that next video. Thanks.